Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CLSR. And I'm your host, the counselor. And today we're going to be talking about this thing called harm reduction. Now, when we think about harm reduction, many of us think about substances, which the majority of the time it is really about substance use. And when you think about harm reduction, there's a lot of people who are against harm reduction for various reasons. And it's like, let's say if you have somebody who has an addiction problem, and instead of these individuals just quitting outright, which is very hard quite often for people to do, not impossible, but very hard. And the expectations can be exceedingly high for a number of people who are trying to quit substance use. See, when you think of harm reduction, it applies in different areas of society. Many people don't know that. It's not just about harm reduction, but you need to know what harm reduction is. Okay, so rather than completely stopping a harmful activity or abstinence, harm reduction strategies aim to provide a variety of options that reduce the harms the activity may have, both for the people involved and for the community around them. Like, think when it comes to substance abuse, harm reduction is used in many areas of public health, like in laws requiring seatbelt use, reduce the harms caused by car accidents. The most well known use, however, is the reduction of substance use. And over the centuries, societies have used different ways to limit the harms from substance use. Some substances could only be used in religious or healing ceremonies. Today, in most countries, the justice system is used to limit or ban the use of substances that can cause harm. And this could be detrimental to many health, which we'll get into much more later, but no one has found a single solution to problem substance use that works all the time. And more people see that a variety of approaches is needed. It's catching on, but it's not as quick as you would like to because there are a lot of people who are ill out there that need help. Harm reduction is just one of these approaches. Okay? And how does this work? Well, we probably got to get into a little bit of history. First, you got to know that in the early 1980s, HIV or AIDS was growing as a public health threat. The infection spread rapidly among certain groups, including those who shared needles to inject illegal drugs. And the justice system, as a means of stopping illegal drug use, could not work quickly enough to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS. In fact, it could make the problem worse. People who feared getting arrested for their drug use might not get tested for the infection. And it was clear other approaches were needed. Harm reduction had been around for a while, but with the HIV/AIDS crisis, it came into greater use in many countries. The harm reduction approach for HIV/AIDS would include providing education about the dangers of sharing needles, distributing clean needles and cleaning kits, giving out free condoms. You know, in the schools, they have a tendency to do that. Well, I think it's also important, though, that we know what are some of the effects and the causes of this. See, HIV infection is really the only one of many harms that can result from substance use. Other risks include the effects of substances themselves, like dementia caused by long term heavy alcohol use. The method of using the substances, like if you get infections from using dirty equipment to inject or snort drugs. There are impurities in the substances, like household cleaners mixed in with heroin, and receiving some other substance than the one that supposedly was purchased, like rubbing alcohol instead of vodka. There are people out there drinking mouthwash because it has alcohol content in it. So there are things to consider, right? And there are indirect harms of substance use. There are also risks of harms to both the person who uses substances and those around them, like driving under the influence, risking injury or killing oneself or others, getting involved in illegal and or dangerous activity to get the substances or to get the money to pay for them, having unprotected sex, and being at risk of sexually transmitted infections or unplanned pregnancy. See, you got to wonder, why do some people use substances? Well, why some people use substances has been a long discussion, right? But why do some people keep on using substances even when the causes are serious? When this thing causes serious harm, the substance that they're using, no one knows for sure why people indulge in it. There's various reasons. There seems to be a mix of biological, social, environmental, and physiological factors involved in problem substance use. Since we don't know exactly why people use substances, even when that use causes serious health, social, and legal problems, finding ways of ending dangerous substance use will be a long term challenge for many people in society. Like, however, in the short term, we got to consider we can at least reduce the ill effects. Rather than try to find out why people use substances, harm reduction simply accepts that some do. Instead of trying to force people to quit using, which is often costly and ineffective, harm reduction focuses on lowering the risk of harm involved in using. And there's plenty of countries that advocate for this. Okay? Now, people also vary widely in their level of use. The severity of the harms from their use, their goals, and their motivation to change, this varies as well. Therefore, rather than take a one size fits all approach, harm reduction provides a range of options, right? Like, and think about the individual choice, which is key to harm reduction. Like coffee. Coffee contains caffeine, a mood altering drug. Think about what might happen if coffee were illegal, right? If the caffeine were made illegal. Simply, people would probably keep on using it despite, you know, the consequences, just to avoid getting caught. A lot of money would be spent on catching and punishing them, because caffeine is still a drug. It's a mood altering drug. And when you see people going to all these coffee shops, and I mean in North America, like here in Canada, it's like caffeine, country. It should be called Caffeine Canada because everyone's at Tim Hortons lineup after lineup. It's ridiculous. But it's true, and it is a drug. People forget that. And, people just have this assumption, oh, it's just coffee. However, so was cocaine years ago. Cocaine used to be sold on shelves in the early 19th century. It was common, right? A lot of the drugs that are illegal today were used quite commonly until they figured out the long-term effects of these drugs. So you got to consider there are things that you need to consider when you're thinking about harm reduction. It aims at both individuals and communities. Many harm reduction strategies are reflected in programs that focus attention and resources on communities and individuals. And I could say that over and over, communities and individuals. Harm reduction programs at the community level would include like designated driver programs, low risk drinking guidelines, needle exchange programs, non smoking policies, safer sex information, safe injection sites, condom distribution programs, methadone maintenance therapy. See, these programs use a variety of activities to promote the safety of individuals and communities, right? Like I mentioned, the needle exchange programs use community development, health communications, and health education to reach people who use injection drugs. And it's sad to see, but it's out there. And a lot of times it's sitting in our community parks, these needles, when you could have a program that could help these people go in a safe place where they can use. And I know it's a challenge for a lot of people, especially very religious people. They're just totally against it. There's a number of issues we could address, but we still come across this question that it's hard to answer in many situations: is why do people use substances? Although the use of harm reduction is growing, not everyone supports it. And some members of the general public and services such as law enforcement and healthcare see abstinence as the only acceptable goal for substance use programs. It's kind of sad, but it's true. There are common fears about harm reduction strategies, such as needle exchanges. One is that they will bring more substance use and other problems, such as vandalism, theft, prostitution to the neighborhood. Another is that they will promote substance use among young people. Like, if you're talking to the community and providing accurate information about a proposed program, this may help calm some of the fears. Careful evaluation of new programs can provide helpful information on the benefits of harm reduction programs compared to other programs. And when you think about it, there's a stigma attached to substance use. Yes, I said it. There are real stigmas attached to this substance use. Many objections to harm reductions are based on stigma towards those people who use it. And you know what stigma means? Basically, valuing people less because of their condition or their circumstances, right? When you view one person separate from the rest of society because they have an issue or a problem with drugs. Reducing stigma is an important part of harm reduction. As long as there is stigma, many people will continue to hide their substance use instead of getting help. We should not need to hide in 2021. We should recognize we've had enough experiences with many of these drugs that we need to kind of educate ourselves that it's never really a quick fix, but people tend to think that it is. Sometimes even with drinking, you might have to go time and time and time and time again, right? Where you keep, you fall off the wagon and get back up. There are treatments out there. Even when organizations are open to trying harm reduction approaches, there can be challenges. However, many treatment programs, even abstinence based ones, have brought harm reduction strategies into their treatments because they realize the importance of it. A client's treatment plan can have a goal of reduced use. The treatment program can help the client reach that goal by developing refusal skills and coping with high risk situations for problem substance use. And there are great programs out there. See, in some cases, blending harm reduction with other programs may not work so well. Like in some treatment groups, clients with abstinence goals are placed in the same group as those who choose to cut back on their use. This can be a challenge for both clients and counselors, particularly in programs with a residential component. See, in these cases, residential clients may be required to be abstinent, while those in community treatment are free to select their own goals, right? It is possible to blend harm reduction programs with other types of programs, but careful planning is needed, right? And there are strategies that you can use. Harm reduction is not only about formal programs. Don't get that twisted. Individuals can put harm reduction principles to work in everyday life. Like if you work with clients who use substances or are concerned about a friend or family member's substance use, some of the strategies that you can use to help them reduce harm to themselves would be like promoting responsible drinking or giving them information about safer use or referring them to like needle exchange programs. It is important that we measure success when it comes to harm reduction, right? The harm reduction focuses on strategies that reduce the harm that people may experience from the use of drugs and respects the dignity, humanity, and human rights of people who use drugs. Success is measured in terms of individual and community quality of health, not in the levels of substances a person is or is not using. The harm reduction approach views any movement in the direction of decreased harm, regardless of how small, as a positive move. I said it, a positive move. So, how can you help if you find that there's somebody you know or you may be having some concerns regarding substance use? If you are worried that someone you know may have a mental health or substance use problem, it is important to encourage him or her to get help. And you can do this by offering assistance by using like a family service agency, a community mental health agency, a counselor or therapist, a family doctor, a community health care center, a religious or spiritual leader, A workplace employee assistant program, like it's called EAP program. A lot of workplaces have them, and surprisingly enough, there's a lot of people that don't really know of it. You can have access to telephone hotlines, a hospital, a settlement agency. Like if a person is an immigrant or like a refugee, there are various programs and services that you can access to get some support. But the real question is, are you going to do that? And it's important that you consider it if you have not considered it. Because a lot of the times we try to handle these issues that sometimes and quite often get out of control because we're trying to do it ourselves. Harm reduction usually works when you have the support of other people to check in with you, to support you when you hit your lows, to make sure that you have resources readily available. It's just so important, harm reduction. I think it's something that we could help so many more people if we encourage harm reduction as opposed to, especially when it comes to substance use, as opposed to just immediately stopping. I mean, there are some substances, if you just stop, you could die. And I know that sounds extreme, but it is quite possible. So, if I could just reiterate some of the points that I made on harm reduction, I mean, you need to understand that harm reduction accepts, for better or worse, that licit and illicit drug use is a part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore and condemn them. It understands that drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledges that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer. In addition, it establishes quality of individual and community life, and not necessary cessation of all drug use as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. It calls for the non judgmental, non coercive provision of services and resources to people who use drugs in the communities in which they live in order to assist them in reducing attendant harm. It ensures that people who use drugs and those with a history of drug use routinely have a real voice in the creation of programs and policies designed to serve them. It affirms people who use drugs themselves as the primary agents of reducing the harms of their drug use and seeks to empower them to share information and support each other in strategies which meet their actual conditions of use. And it recognizes that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capacity for effectively dealing with drug related harm. We need to consider and not attempt to minimize or ignore the real tragic harm and danger that can be associated with illicit drug use. These are very important things to consider when it comes to harm reduction. We have to have a respect for people. We have to support people. We got to put the baggage, our own baggage, on the shelf, not be so judgmental, and understand that people really need help and support. And there are too many people out there who are judging because people pick up habits. Well, these are substances that are in the world that people pick up. There are so many issues that we could talk about in regards to substance use. However, what we need to acknowledge is that people are people. And whether they're down and they need our help and our support, the last thing they need is our judgment. We have a world of various cultures, genders, ethnicities, and we need to have respect for everyone. And we need to acknowledge that harm reduction is going to pay dividends in the future if we start acknowledging that there is a need for harm reduction programs out there. We got to help. We got to stop judging, stop pointing the finger. We have to look at ourselves. If we really want to help someone else, if we really care about our fellow human being, then we have to understand that there is rarely a quick fix for substance use, and not everyone is the same. Some people can quit with some strength and some courage. And then there's some people that continually fall down, but they need to get up. And sometimes they need our assistance to get up. And I am encouraging you to be one of those change agents, one of those people that puts their bias aside and they actually care about people and they understand that instead of worrying about your community and going, oh, there's drugs everywhere. Let's provide services and programs to help, because as this world becomes more increasingly complex and there are more drugs out there and substances at the hands of our children, we need to start looking at all forms of treatment, not just one, all forms of treatment. And if we have to integrate them, that's what we got to do. But I think it's important that we consider that there are wonderful programs out there. However, there is always a need for improvement. And I think harm reduction in substance use is a program that should be utilized more often to help our people. Okay, so good information out there, and I want to say be like the wise old bird and spread the word, because harm reduction is real and it belongs in society. We need to help people who cannot help themselves. And that's a big thing. People are so busy judging and telling people what they should do. And the point is, when they can't do, we leave them to their own devices. And that is not a human trait. Caring, we don't need a religion to tell us to care. We have the capacity to make change for the better. And as time goes on, we need to do that. So take care, people.